In the room,
Maggie Williams.
Deb Haas. Well, why don't you start off by telling me how you wound up in the service?
I was drafted, to tell you the truth.
How old were you?
23. I had a couple of deferments while I got a sheet metal apprenticeship at Curtis Airplanes where I was working in Buffalo. And was engaged to be married at that time, so I left my handprints in the door jamb when Uncle grabbed me. I never married after following, let's see, I was drafted in January, and let's see, we were married in November of the same year. When I came back after going to technical school at Lockheed P-38 factory in Burbank, California. And I after the schooling, I went to, got a delay en route and went back home, married, and came back to Hammerfield, Fresno, California, and from there was assigned to the 474th Fighter Group in Van Nuys, so that was just across the road practically from the Lockheed factory where I'd gone to school. That was pretty nice.
Tell me what a day there would be like, a typical day.
In what respect?
Well, you got up in the morning and what did you do?
I went to, you mean after I was assigned? Well, we did maintenance on P-38 aircraft at Metropolitan Airport. It's an old commercial airport where we actually lived in an orange grove. And pilots got, new pilots were coming into the organization then, and they flew missions from there. And a few weeks later, we went up to Palmdale, California, which was north of LA, as I remember. And it was a CAA in those days. Instead, now it's an FAA. It was an alternate airfield for the commercial transports that be weathered in down there in Los Angeles, and they would land up there when it was bad. But I think when our planes put some of the first black marks on the runways up there, it was a new field.
What was your job?
I was an aircraft mechanic.
And so, again, when you talk about a typical day,
Go off the flight line and spend the day out there and doing whatever we had to do to maintain these airplanes.
what kind of condition did you find some of them in? I mean, your job is to maintain them all. I can't imagine with all the aircraft that were out there that was a very easy job to do.
Well, we were assigned to a particular airplane, so we weren't concerned with more than just our own airplane. We were there for several weeks at Palmdale, and then we went up to Santa Maria, California, to be prepared for overseas shipment. And of course, at that time, we didn't know which direction we were going. With P-38s, most of them were used in the Pacific because they, at the time, were the longest range fighters that we had. And so, of course, we were sweating out going to the Pacific, which I didn't care to go to. My wife has relatives, and her dad and mother were from England, and I wanted to get back there, and that's where we went. So from Santa Maria, we went by train all the way across the country, practically through our hometown to New England, and that's where we went from boarded the ship and went to England, Liverpool, England.
How long did that take?
As I remember, it's about 13, 14 days.
So you've gone across the country by train, and then
Yeah.
it takes that long to get...
Yeah, I don't recall how long it took on the train, but it was about 13 or 14 days on the ocean.
And then tell me what happened upon arrival.
We we got off the ship in the middle of the night, and some of the guys were so weak from dysentery, I suppose. I was lucky I wasn't. I didn't eat I must have eaten the right things. But I remember that some of them were dragging their barracks bags up the ramps, and their socks were coming out of the holes in the barracks bag. That's what I remember.
What was the trip like then? If some people were getting that sick, what was it like being on that
It was
ship?
rough, but I think they got a hold of some bad food, probably.
Not having the bad food, what was the trip like for you?
Well, I would have been sick if I wasn't able to go down and stay horizontal in a bunk.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I was lucky in that respect.
So once you got there, where were you assigned?
From Liverpool, we boarded a train, went down to the southwest corner of England, near Weymouth, England. It's right on the Channel. And Warmwell was the name of the former, well, it was an Air Force, Royal Air Force base. In fact, I read years later it was the most westerly base in the RAF Fighter Command. And there were some British planes there. In fact, the second day we were there was an outfit from, we understood they were from, it was a Hawker Typhoon airplane, fighter planes. And they were RAF Indian pilots. And we heard a roar up there, and one of the pilots were going to show these bloody Yanks how to do it, I guess. But he never pulled out. He didn't strike the field itself, but off the edge somewhere. And it could have been either a suicide, or it could have been a compressibility problem, which I later heard the Hawker Typhoons did have. It was a situation where the pilot, the controls wouldn't react to pulling out because of the distortion and through the aerodynamics of the thing. P-38s had that problem until on a few cases where pilots were lost through the compressibility problems, but they later, in the later models, they came up with a device that deployed from the underside of the wing, which the pilot could trigger a button on the control wheel, and it would pull it out without imposing any stresses on the tail section.
When you're working on these planes, I mean, how does that weigh on you, knowing, the missions that they're going to be involved in and the people that they're going to be carrying?
Well, it was fairly routine, of course. It was interesting, I guess, I think anybody went overseas, in the back of their mind is, how long is this thing going to last, or how long before we get home? Mm-hmm. But it was fairly routine. We'd help. I wasn't involved in the loading bombs. It was aircraft and engine maintenance that we did on the airplane that we were assigned to. After we got to, after first we had to change an engine, and after an engine change, the airplane has to be flown at a reduced power to break in the engine to see if everything is going to function. And our pilot was good enough to take each of us up. We took the radio out behind you know what a P-38 is?
Well, for the people who don't, can you describe it?
Well, a P-38 is a twin-engine fighter with twin booms, and well, anyway, the pilot, in order to accommodate it's a single-place fighter, and he took the radio out, and we'd crawl back in the back of there and rest our arm on the back of his seat, and he took us up, and we flew over Poole, England, in the late afternoon or early evening, and see the sunset and some barrage balloons and everything. J.B. Stone from Apache, Oklahoma was our pilot, and after we got to France, a mission, we had a bad mission, and they lost 8 out of 12 planes. They were jumped by about 40 Messerschmitts, the way we read it, our book on the 428 Fighter Squadron. So we lost lost our pilot. And of course that was a kind of a shocking experience. Of course, they always expect to make it, but you never know.
When you're in your 20s and you're fixing these planes, maintaining these planes, you go up with the pilot. I mean, you remember squeezing in there, and then you hear that this person's just gone. I mean, it's a reality, I suppose. But what's that like for you?
I don't know. I wasn't. I really don't have any really strong feelings on it. I was, of course, shocked when the plane didn't come back. We didn't lose all of those. I think 2 of them were able to bail out, and we were able to. One of them got back to the outfit, and the other one I think was taken prisoner of war, as I remember. But I don't know. I just took it as a matter of course, I guess.
Right. What was happening in the war then, at that time while you were over there?
Well, we didn't go over to Normandy until approximately a month after D-Day, thank goodness. But had an interesting experience prior to that when all the troops were massed and prior to D-Day in Weymouth and surrounding area. I was in town on pass one day, and a convoy went by, and somebody shouted my name. And of course, I couldn't keep up with the convoy, but it bugged me. And it was about a month later, my wife, I got a letter from her, said, "Frank saw you over there in England." Kid from across the street, isn't that something? And he went in on D-Day, and he made it. And we looked him up about 2 or 3 years ago when we were visiting up home. And I heard since then he had died of a heart attack or something, but it was nice to have been able to, he was
And there you were, and there he was.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting, riding around on a bicycle on the wrong side of the road.
What else strikes you as far as interesting about just the being there?
Well, I would have liked to have gotten up into the area where my in-laws had lived prior to coming here in 1910 and 12. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't able to get up that far. I did get to London once, but I didn't see any appreciable damage from previous German activity. Mm-hmm. Apparently, it either been covered up or cleaned up or in the wrong part of town, probably.
What was it like when you said you got to Normandy a month later? What was it like there then?
Well, as we went, we boarded the ship, LCI, Landing Craft Infantry, it was called. I wasn't familiar with that Navy terminology, but we had bunks about 3 or 4 deep down in the hold. Just went to bed, and next morning when we woke up and had something to eat for breakfast, and they were steaming into Omaha Beach there, and they were still sinking barges for breakwater, you know. So that was still going on. And when we got to started climbing up the embankment there, we saw the thousands of wooden crosses, temporary crosses, were already in place where all those individuals had been killed during the invasion. But, that was pretty shocking. Our base A-11 was one of the first bases that was established in France at that time. We were one of the first fighter groups to be located there, I understand. I think there was another one that beat us to it, but they operated out of there for several weeks. I don't recall just how long. And then we went on to another base. It was for A-72. It doesn't mean anything to you. It was not far from San Quintone. We would say San Quentin, I guess. And we met some French people there that invited us to eat at that. We were taking a walk one night, 3 of us. And the fella had lived in Amiens, which was about 60 miles away from there, but he had taken his family down to this little place called Pouilly, however they pronounce it, I don't know, so that his family could get some food to eat. But it was really gracious of us. We really thankful that they invited us to come for Sunday dinner, and I was interested that they had folded. They had each course came out in a separate plate. This is giving us the full treatment, I guess. So I had rabbit. I'd never had rabbit to eat, but it was delicious. And then potato and whatever else, and of course red wine. And then when we left, they wouldn't have it any other way. They invited us to come back again. So after the war, I corresponded with them several times, but I drifted off and I didn't maintain contact with them. But it was real nice. This fella, Pierre Elliott was his name, he had to ride his bicycle back weekends to see the family, 60 miles.
Oh my.
And then when he got down to our base, he had to go all the way around the base. They wouldn't allow him to go through. The main road went right through the base, and that was what he had to do.
When did you leave there? Did you come home from there? Or?
No, went on to A43, which was, it rained about the week or 2 that we were there, and the pilots didn't do very much flying from there. But a lot of people visited there, and I have some snapshots I'd taken of the kids and the parents walking around, visiting with them.
Were they asking you your stories then?
You what?
Were they asking you your experiences then?
No, of course we had the language barrier. I couldn't speak French, they couldn't speak English, of course. Well, it rained most of the time we were at that base, and then we went to A78 Belgium. And that was right adjacent to the Battle of the Bulge. So we spent the whole winter there in so-called winterized tents with stoves.
And I assume they were not to your comfort winterized?
Not really. I mean, how can you winterize a tent? We had a door on the front and a lot of straw under the mattress to insulate it. But they trucked in some briquettes to burn in the little pot-belly stoves that were located in each tent. So it was a long winter, but I took some more pictures of engines being changed with a snow background. It was a good experience.
And what about from there? Where did you go from there?
Well, they wanted somebody to crew a P-38 for General Quesada. He was the commanding general of 9th Tactical Air Command. We were in 9th Tactical Air Command, and they wanted somebody to crew an airplane for the general. Mm-hmm. The command had a small detachment with all the airplanes in the command, all the fighter planes, and they had some C-47s located there too. It was adjacent, not some distance away from the command itself. Mm-hmm. So I thought I might as well go up there and get another stripe, and eventually got another stripe. So that was in Liège, Belgium. So went there, and from there we went to a place near Bonn, Germany. Mm-hmm. And that was where the general came out to fly the P-38 one day. And he was a rough type of guy. The guys didn't really, I guess they had some kind of a disagreement, or he had, with the flight line while we were still in England. And he broke down a number of the enlisted people for some kind of an infraction, which they didn't. I think the radio was in op or something. But anyway, he flew the airplane, and I assisted in getting his shoulder straps, the left over the left and the right over the right shoulder. And he goes, "I don't use those things." That's kind of a guy he was. But he came back and apparently didn't need those straps, luckily. And I just thought to myself, I hope you don't bury your head in the gun sight. Well, from there we went to a place called Kolita, farther east, and it became the eastern zone where the Russians occupied. And I had several flights in a P-38. I, at that time, was crewing a Group Snoop model. It was a P-38 without any guns in it. It had a bombardier's nose, which could accommodate 2 or 3 people, actually. It made for the bombardier. If it was used as a bomb on a mission like that, each squadron had a Group Snoop, so-called, assigned to it. I don't think they were used too much except for utility work and flying down to Riviera on assignments, you know. But I had several flights and had an interesting experience. One day I was out there and a pilot came out. I didn't know him because he's from command. All the pilots were somewhere in the general area. And said, "I'm going to go do some aerobatics. If you'd like to come, go get a parachute." And I did, and it was quite a thrill.
I would imagine so.
It had been up previously with like I told you, with a pilot that we lost. But we went up to altitude, and he really wrung it out. And coming down, we went down through a little valley and looked up, and there was a farmer and a one-horse plow. He never heard us coming. A 38's awful quiet because the exhaust system is very muffled through the supercharger. So anyway, we did up at the end of the valley and came down Chandel and came back the same way. And by that time, the farmer and the horse were all excited. Farmer was swinging his arms, but it was a really thrilling experience for me.
Through it all, through experiences like that and the day-to-day and all the traveling around, I mean, did the weight of the work that you and the other people in the military were doing, the responsibility of it, did that occur to you, or were you just living your life every day?
I'm afraid we had it made compared to the foot soldiers, because we were right adjacent to the Battle of the Bulge. In fact, we could hear rumblings. It was that far, and of course, if you read anything about it, there was they had it was dead of winter, and they couldn't get any air support because the weather was so bad. When the weather finally broke, we were able to fly missions, and they were back in 10 to 15 minutes. So you could hear the bombs when they dropped them over there. And so it was that was the closest we got to the real stuff. We were lucky.
As we think about the educational purpose of all of this, what would you say to the students, the educators who see this about the, larger than one person responsibility of whether it's serving your country or doing something during a war? And how do you feel about the work that you did?
Well, we did what we had to do. I mean, I don't know if there was any patriotism involved. What can you say? We just took it as it came.
There will never be another war like that one.
I'm afraid not. I hope not.
Right.
It may be more sudden.
Right. I mean, how do you see the future of war and fighting differ from what you experienced?
It's been a long time ago. It'll be completely different, of course. I think the atomic bomb, of course, it terminated the Japanese war in a hurry, and in that respect, it was great. But it's sure added to the miseries of life since, hasn't it? Everybody has that hanging over their heads now. But
I mean, that's really all the questions I have, unless there's anything else we haven't talked about that strikes you as important, or important that people remember about your generation that served in that war. It's up to you. I always like to just open it up in case there's anything else you want to say.
gosh, I don't know, I've been saying enough.
Maggie, have I missed anything?
I've said mostly good stuff, I think. It was a great experience. It was a grim experience, I guess you'd say. Wife and I finally got over there in 1980. We flew over and got to visit the Yorkshire area and Northumberland, and rented a car, drove on the wrong side of the road for a month. That's an experience.
Yes.
But that's that I would have liked to. I had a bunch of addresses for relatives, but of course couldn't get away that long. I was really impressed in England. The first time I went to London, well, the only time I went to London, I was impressed by the railroad system. Even the little private railway crossings for farms and so forth had gates that came down. In this country, we don't value human life to that degree. Of course, you might say that railways are subsidized over there, but aren't they here? We pump out billions of dollars for everybody in the world, but we can't do anything as minute as furnishing crossing gates for our rural crossings in this country, and we kill a bunch of them in Ohio every year. Hey, they say, well, it only had crossbucks. Well, people's minds drift, and they don't. That isn't talking about the war, but this is what I think about every time I read about one of these fatalities on the road that goes north and south through Dayton. Okay.
Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to talk with